No, that nears the end of our presentation. We do have our architect here today from Shive Hattery, very experienced professional in designing and making recommendations for this type of facility. We also have our professionals from the Samuels Group. It's a construction management firm that has extensive experience in construction detention facilities here. And so we would very much like to open up to public questions and try to provide feedback wherever we can. Yes, ma'am.
Excuse me, I'm assuming that the access of taking prisoners into the courthouse so that they don't go through the blue area would be that gray hallway down there on the left.
Yeah, so it's actually...
So they would never come out?
That's correct. If you go to the second floor, it's a little bit more visible, I think. It's actually a second floor connection, right above where security currently is located in the courthouse.
Okay.
And there's a window there above that balcony that would be changed into a doorway. Okay. And so they'd be through the stairwell here in the corner, they would be processed into the courtroom right there and into their court appearances directly from the detention facility. No, it's a separate, secured, designated hallway just for the purposes of transporting those individuals.
And it's on the second floor.
That's correct.
There's an existing room there that would be converted to a holding room that would keep them separate from the public space.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, as was mentioned, there'd be a separate room that currently is designated as a magistrate court jury room. And we're told by the courthouse it never gets used. And so we would repurpose that as a holding area for one or two individuals that are making a court appearance. The courtrooms that they make their appearance in typically would be on the second or third floor. And so avoiding the first floor where the bulk of our public traffic is one of the goals we had in trying to provide security, not only for the public, but quite honestly the correction officers and those inmates as well. We have a responsibility to those inmates to see that they're in a safe and secure environment. We've had those serious suicide occurrences that were mentioned. We've had those escapes. We've had those assaults, and that's largely due to our inability to provide adequate observation of these people while they're in our care. And so being able to have those direct line of sights reduces that. I've been reading about some other counties that have recently had some suicides completed, and the lawsuits that are associated with those things usually are multi-million-dollar lawsuits that are imposed upon the county. And so that's why we see very significant liability insurance rates currently. And knowing that we're going to be failing our new federal inspection for the Prison Rape Elimination Act, we've been advised that will further increase our liability insurance rates, and so it's going to make us additionally cost prohibitive to operate our current facility.
That shows the walkway.
Yeah, there's the, oops, clumsy me. There's the walkway represented there on the second floor.
Another question, you were talking about storage. What amount of square footage is being allocated to storage, and is your storage, is it necessary that you keep so much on site, or can you do an off-site storage facility?
Would you be willing to address that question a little bit for us? This is Mike Lewis with Shive Hattery. He's very familiar with the state requirements and code requirements and the needs of a facility like this.
Good morning. Thank you for everyone for being here. With regard to the storage, we've addressed storage in several different aspects of the facility. We've looked at a property storage room that's in the intake processing area. That property storage is sized for the ultimate long-term growth of the inmates' needs and property needs. That particular area is about 1,200 square feet in space, give or take. And their bags, they have bags of property, secured property that would go into that area. In the food service and laundry area, there's long-term storage and bulk storage in that particular location. And ultimately, as much as possible, we're looking at the new standards for electronic record keeping. And that isn't always the case, particularly when it comes to evidentiary, because that has to be physical property. But to the fullest extent possible, we've looked at that. And I believe we have a very well thought out storage plan in here, so you don't run into the problems 50 years from now that you've experienced in your current one. So does that help?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Is this something this facility could be built out of ICF, says Wolverine, I guess you would know? Because that, I think would substantially save a lot of money in the long run.
And since I don't even know what ICFs are, I'm going to defer that one as well.
Insulated concrete forms.
Repeat the question?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, if you repeat the question.
I think the question has to do with the type of construction and what's possible here. What we've looked at in the facility is a couple different layers of construction. For the cell type, we're looking at using modular construction in there, and we haven't ultimately picked the way that will get done. It will either be concrete, which potentially is an ICF, as you've talked about, or metal panel, steel construction metal panel cells. But we've been able to accommodate in our cost estimates both. The exterior envelope of the building right now that you see in brick is a thin-laid brick and thin-laid stone system on metal studs, because we're not relying on the exterior of the building to have any security purpose, and we're looking at the materials to complement the courthouse and make sure the material selections are consistent with the materials on the courthouse and respectful of that. So it's a long answer to your question. I apologize for that. The ICF forms back in the intake and processing area, where we're going to be looking at more traditional construction, either concrete block, there's some potential there. But it's just not been thought to that level of degree yet.
Yeah, that could definitely save in the jail area, that would save a lot on heating costs and.
The wall construction in the project is designed to have an R value of R20 in the wall, and the roof construction is an R30 on the roof. So I respect that. We just would look at those systems and compare it to the R values and the performance standards that we see. So.
There's also some site constraints in regards to using typical masonry walls versus the metal cells. So we're gaining site square footage, if you want to call it that, so that we can fit it onto the site. Our job is to look at the things that you're talking about as we start going through design and saying where can we save additional dollars, or basically move those numbers around so that we can best fit our facility. So as we start doing that design, we'll be working with Shive side by side and coming up with those ideas as we go.
Maybe this is a good place just to briefly comment on the design process and citizen involvement. The design process, when the referendum passes, will take 9 months to complete the design process and select all the final materials and do the final technical layout. That's why we're looking at March of next year to go out for bid. We're expecting in our process to have citizen involvement in the process, where we will have public meetings where you can come and discuss the materials and the selections. Our goal there is to have as much local involvement and participation as the facility is getting constructed as possible. So we want to be very sensitive to the materials and the choices and the skills that are in the area.
Right, and I don't think that the ICF isn't like going to save you in the material wise, it'd be a long-term savings.
We appreciate that. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions, thoughts? Mr. Kernan?
A couple concerns, I suppose, would be a way to say it. I noticed in this replacement, the question and answer handout, it has this quote from the NIC study that says the current facility is outdated, antiquated, and obsolete. It was a poor design in 1969 and remains so today. I have here the newspaper from when they were trying to construct the current jail, and at that time, it said the proposed jail was planned by Eccles, Farber, and Associates of Marion, West Virginia, which the officials said was the top firm for jail design in the country. That seems to be a little inconsistent, and I have a little bit of skepticism built in because recently Clinton had an issue with EMS billing, And the fire chief stood before the council and said, we're doing everything exactly right, we've been to training and so forth. And at the end of the day, the city had to pay a $4.5 million fine, incurred over $1 million in legal costs, and you know, relying on what the council was told. And subsequently, the public works director told the council that a new solid waste collection system was wonderful and would work well, and checked out, and it turned out to have not worked the way we were told it was going to work. So I have,
Would you like me to respond to that portion first, or did you have additional
go ahead. If you'd like to
comment or
respond to
question?
that, or Mr. Lewis, I believe. Right?
Well, maybe it could be a two-part. I'd certainly welcome any additional input from anybody that's here joining us
The real
today.
question is, how do we know this time
Sure.
that we get it right?
I'd speak first to my perceptions and my understanding of the situation, as I'm one of the Board of Supervisors that voted to put this specifically on the ballot for public consideration. And so the education that I've received, because I'm not a construction specialist or an engineer or any of these things that, you know, would be the professionals and the authority with regards to those types of decisions. We've worked very hard to retain the top professionals in our area, and I understand the quote in the paper was that they did the same at the time. I know that Shive Hattery's involvement throughout the state in the designing these types of facilities has been extensive for many years, and in fact that's the group that the state retained when they had problems in new construction at their penitentiary. Shive Hattery was brought in to address and fix those problems. So I think they do put themselves in a position to be very, you know, knowledgeable and understanding about those types of challenges and about what's modern and what's the current trend. I think that one of the biggest components is that there was a big evolution in the philosophies of how people are jailed and detained in this type of facility shortly after we completed construction. And so when we built our current facility, which is, you know, when you're walking through the hallway is kind of similar to a movie from about Alcatraz or something like that. There's rows and rows of bars and very straight line rows of cells. There's no point where you can have a line of sight into more than 2 cells at a time. And so the main part of that evolution, I think, was meant to address efficiencies of observation, where a single individual you know, puts themselves, or put that person in a position where they can successfully observe all of the inmates at the same time. And so that's meant to and designed to maximize efficiency in labor and cost of operation. And I think that's the main, you know, reason or motivation for that change in philosophy. But as to, you know, that firm, I think a lot of us would like to have a conversation with the people that designed our current facility and why they made decisions to put copper and cast iron plumbing embedded in 18 inches of concrete, which is caustic to those materials and cause those materials to rot and decay. You know, there's challenges like that we would love to ask them about. The other thing I would say is that when our facility was constructed and opened in '69, it had already failed 2 referendums. And so that project had been scaled back 2 times from its original proposed structure. And I think that there was enhancements and facility there that was taken away, and we were left with what we have today, which was a less than desirable original intent. And so if we look at that and say, you know, ideally they wanted to build something better than what we have today. The voters didn't support it at the time, and in order to try to win that voter approval, they reduced the cost, and as a result of reducing the cost, they had to reduce the function and you know, the long-term feasibility as a result. So I think you add those things all up, and I think it compounds to the situation you're trying to address. I appreciate the quote that was in the paper at the time, but my knowledge and understanding is that opinion quickly changed very shortly after we opened our doors. And if you had any additional comments, I don't know. Just a moment, if I could.
Mike, I can share a few thoughts on this, and a little bit of it is a history of corrections. The existing facility, 1969, it was in the mid to early 1980s when the National Institute of Corrections developed a facility in Boulder, Colorado, about 1985. And that became the model facility for what essentially corrections and detention has evolved in today. It is the direct supervision or podular supervision concept, and philosophically that's been around again since about 1986. There's been adaptations and changes, but for the most part, this approach and philosophy that we have laid out here has been really essentially proven for over 30 years now. But there was a philosophical change in approach from the linear jail approach that your current facility is designed for and what that paper is referencing. So just a little history in that regard. One thing about best practices, we take a tremendous amount of pride in looking at best practice techniques and ways that materials can have longevity. On the floor plan, you will see backfed chases in this. It's a graphic right now, but ultimately it will add tremendous value to the county and the maintenance of those. Behind each cell is a raceway, a 5-foot raceway that runs and rings the cells. That has the ability for maintenance staff to get in there and modify electrical and plumbing connections. They're not built into the floor. They're accessible. They're easily maintained. And so this whole approach and technique that we've put in here about this best practice concept is done in a manner to help the facility have longevity, and you won't have the concerns that you've had today. So, for myself personally, if I could just digress there for a second, the first jail that I did in Iowa was in 1996 in Hardin County. I've done approximately 20 around the state, anywhere from Polk County that's 1,500 beds all the way down to Decatur County that's 24 beds. But in the neighborhood of 20 counties that I've been engaged with here in the state. And I guess that's over a 20-25 year period. And so I take I guess great pride in the fact that we've actively worked and designed these facilities, and thank you for your comments about the state hiring us and to correct some of those issues so that's accurate. So I hope that helps, Mike.
We have another question.
Go ahead, sorry.
Okay, well, we of course had a previous conversation, and I know that you have that kind of experience, and I don't know what kind of experience the people have that built the jail we have now. And of course, I don't know how they got labeled as the best in the country. One thing I would point out is Jack Ruby killed Lee Harvey Oswald during a transfer in 1963. And you've been saying this was built in 1969. It seems like in those 6 years, they could have gotten a little better idea of how you should cite a jail in relation to the courtroom.
Yeah, I didn't get invited to that conversation.
I believe Jack Ruby was being transported from the Dallas Police Department over to the county jail when that occurred, so, you know, they're practices we've all learned that you don't let the public mingle with the inmate when you're transferring.
My first jail was 1988, so I didn't get invited to that conversation either, so.
I will compliment you. Every time you've referred to concrete, you've referred to it as concrete. I notice here it's often referred to as cement, and I'm sure you know that cement is what you use to make concrete.
Cement is a component of concrete, yeah. I know that, and you know, that's a wording semantics that, you know, it could be corrected, but I think for probably most of our public that we're trying to educate, I think they understand what our intent is, so.
My
But thank
brother's
you.
a civil engineer, and he goes nuts every time. Anyway, Exelon was mentioned as being upset that we didn't have more space, and of course the immediate question that comes to my mind, not just in regard to Exelon, but the National Institute of Corrections and so forth, a lot of these people that are setting standards, requirements, etc., have no skin in the game. You know, they're not paying for it. It doesn't cost them anything to make their recommendation.
A lot of them also, the National Institute of Corrections receives no incentive or benefit by whether or not this gets constructed. They came in to do an independent review at no cost to the county and provide their expert opinions based on their experience throughout the entire country. And so while I agree that, they're not being asked to pay for this facility, which we have explored the options of grants and whether or not they exist, and whether there's, additional sources of funding, and they just don't exist. We've been pretty exhaustive in researching those opportunities. But, we're not asking them to build it and bring their staff and their people here either. So I do feel like it's a quality, independent opinion, at least from my perspective. Certainly they work in law enforcement, and they're going to do and make a recommendation that has law enforcement and security in mind, but they're not the ones that are actually here being paid to do the job either.
And I can address the Exelon part of it. Something to keep in mind with Exelon, a lot of that's a trickle-down type of thing. Exelon being forced to do these things by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which we all know is a federal agency. And unfortunately in Iowa, with the 3 nuclear power plants that affect the state of Iowa, there's approximately 6 or 7 communication centers that are affected. So of the 112 communication centers in the state, there's 6 or 7 that this truly affects. So essentially, they could care less about our space needs. They're trying to comply with what the federal government through the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is telling them.
But are you saying that puts an obligation on us to spend money to satisfy their requirements?
Unfortunately, since it's in our area, we are kind of forced. It's one of those things, like many things, I know you're familiar with government, there's a lot of unfunded mandates that come down.
Well, that's the burr under my saddle, yeah. I mean, this community, how much is the Clean Water Act imposed on the county to comply with?
And I appreciate your comments about some of the challenges that the city has had and some of the history that you referenced earlier, but ultimately I guess I haven't experienced that the county has had some of those same missteps, and I understand some of those challenges have been significant for the city, whether it's the garbage collection or the EMS billing, but I haven't seen that type of historical problem from the county side of things. And if there is, I'm open to discussing them, but they haven't been presented to me
I
at
wouldn't
any
want to
point.
confuse the garbage collection and EMS with unfunded mandates.
No, I understand that, but it still all does amount to a burden on the local taxpayers at the end of the day. And I know that it's very significant for people. And that's, I think, part of the reason why we include information about the county's other debts that are going to be satisfied and removed from the levy, and to show that, in just a matter of, 3 or 4 years, I project that the county is going to be in a position to have the debt service slightly higher, and then if you look at that repayment of that loan from the city of Clinton, potentially lower than what the debt service is today across the county. I should also put my caveat in there that that's a decision by the Board of Supervisors, and all the Board of Supervisors have in another election cycle between now and then, so there's no way I can commit to that, because there's going to be a different set of decision makers potentially in those chairs when it's time to make that decision. But I do want to present that potential exists, and that we've tried to analyze what the options are, and we think that's a very probable outcome.
We have another question back there, Dan. Oh, I'm sorry, you have one more, Mike.
I don't know where the National Institute of Corrections is located, but typically...
Washington, D.C.
Well, that's the point. The District of Columbia has the highest percentage of its population earning over $250,000 a year of any municipality in the country. And the counties surrounding it have household incomes of $120,000, $130,000 a year. Clinton County has household income of $38,000 a year, something of that ilk. And so these unfunded mandates, in my view, are coming often from people who are in a totally different environment and have a totally different situation.
When I first contacted them, they were located in Colorado, getting ready to move to Washington, D.C. The gentleman that came here lives in Wisconsin, right north of us. So he had helped a couple of counties up there, and so they contracted with him to come down. And there was another gentleman, and I'm not certain where he's located. Neither one of them live in Washington, D.C. They were experts in jails and jail functions in the criminal justice system, and they just came in and gave us an opinion based on the standards.
The final comment I'd like to make is one I made in a previous meeting, where it seems like there's a fair amount of space on the west side of the jail, and the jail building, the main building, really crowds up on the courthouse. And I used to be the chairman of the Historic Preservation Commission. I think we should build the jail about 30 feet further to the west to open up a little more of a gap, a space. Yes, for example, right here.
You're talking about this space over here?
Yeah.
And then utilizing
Exactly.
this space here?
Exactly. So I'll just make that point. It's my feeling.
There was, well, maybe I defer to Mr. Lewis on that, if you would.
Thanks, Dan. The current design that you see before you is a conceptual design. But right now, the building setback is 30 feet from the property line. So this distance represents 30 feet. So your observations on the distance are correct in terms of the number of feet. We are looking at turning radiuses of vehicles. As vehicles come in and out of there, we are having conversations, and probably will continue to do so, that if these vehicles enter from this side, does that help change the proportion of that? So I think the design will continue to evolve, but at this juncture, the 30 feet was a request of us to keep that distance on that side. And if through the design process we can shift and move it over, that's fine, but it's probably in the neighborhood of 10 or 15 feet at the most to still keep a setback from the street.
And one other consideration, this is the main entrance to go to the courthouse. So we have a lot of people who are older or have mobility problems. We wanted to make it as convenient as possible for them to get into the courthouse without having to.
What I suggested at the previous meeting is that this stay where it is, this be shifted back in the design.
Okay.
I mean, it's fair. We're open to comment. I think we mentioned to have public involved in the process going forward is a very important step. But we will continue to evolve and look at those things, so I appreciate that. If I may, since I have the microphone real quickly, just on standards, I apologize for this, but in 2001, the state jail standards in Iowa required that a two-person cell have 120 square feet in them. The national standards, the American Association of Corrections Accreditation Guidelines, had a different standard in terms of unencumbered and encumbered space. And when you do the calculation on that, that comes out to be around 93 square feet, 94 square feet in a cell. So quite frankly, as a local designer of these facilities, I petitioned the state jail inspector to look at the Iowa standards and reduce the size of the cells to be more consistent with the national standards. And then it was somewhere around 2003 or 4 when the state standards were revised and adopted to be smaller. Otherwise, jails used to be built on the basis of 120 square feet. So there's just advantages and cost savings there, and that national standards can bring and evaluate. So just some thoughts.
The gentleman in the back, thank you for being patient with us.
In a complicated project like this, you know, $21 million, what's the allowance for overruns?
I believe we budgeted 3%, is that correct?
In construction.
In construction
3%?
overrun.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think another, part of that, that to address that concern was a big part of our motivation from the county's side to retain that second opinion from the construction manager, who was actually working with the contractors and doing the material selection and trying to identify that projected cost does meet our needs of constructing the proposed facilities. So.
Okay, the next question I have is this. There's always going to be weather delays or material delays or anything like this. Are there things written into the contract if they run 6 months, 8 months over, that they'll pay a penalty?
Would you care to address that? And if you want to come over and address that. Ultimately, we haven't written the contracts yet.
Right, but I mean,
so
is it standard in the
that's something though that I think that yeah. So Sid Samuels with the Samuels Group.
To answer your question, all those contracts are written with, actually when we write the front end specifications and before they go out for bids, we actually put into the specifications an actual schedule. So as contractors are bidding the work, they understand in a general terms of when they will be responsible for doing their portions of work. So we actually tie that back into their contracts so that we can enforce that. So we take it a little bit further than just putting language in there and saying you'll be done by the state. Makes sense?
I think he's asking if they'll be penalized if they're not done by
Yes.
their deadline. Usually, yes.
Yes, they are, but there's a couple different ways of doing it. You can put in the specifications that if you're not done by a certain period of time, you're penalized, and then there's actual damages. So
What do you mean by actual damage?
actual damages would be training, it'd be delay of the construction of basically if we had to house an inmate in another facility because we were expected to be done by a certain period of time, there are actual expenses that were probably far greater than if you were to penalize them and say if you're not done by this day, it's $1,000 a day or something of that
But
nature.
those are standard in the contract.
Right, those are tied into the contracts. Yep.
Now, of course, that is also taken into account by the contractor in calculating what he's gonna,
That's typically why we don't put the $1,000 a day, because with their penalty, there should be a reward, right? So if they were to get it done sooner, there would be the reward of getting it done sooner. So really, we tie back into the actual cost, because there's costs associated to training staff, housing of inmates, all those administrative costs. Again, that could be far greater because they're not doing their job and getting done when they're supposed to. So we do have contract language with that and tie that back to the contracts. Then it becomes fun to enforce and get through all that.
So maybe it'd be worthwhile talking about your track record on getting work complete.
I like to say they're all done on time and on budget every single time, but the reality of it is that, especially on this side of the state right now, there's a glut of work, right? And so getting those contractors to perform sometimes are very difficult, and you see some of these jobs that are being pushed out. I think good construction management firms have done a good job with their language in those contracts to enforce, and if they don't, having the language in place so that we can get other people to do that work for them continues to push the project forward without an obligation to the taxpayers.
Well, I just wanted to make sure because my son-in-law is a construction manager. They don't build houses, they build stuff like this.
Yep.
In this town. And you'll hear him at the end of a project. They'll call their crews in, they're working all weekends, they're
Yep.
working later hours at night, so they don't, the construction company does not have to pay the penalties.
That's right. But there's different tactics in which you do that. So that sounds more like a general contracting type approach, which is, we do that as well.
Right. I
But
mean,
under
using
construction
contract-
management, it's how do you continue to accomplish the same task by using your contract language.
Right.
So there's people still work those hours, they still push to the end of the projects. It's just having the knowledge and the ability to push those types of contracts.
Yeah, because he's in contact with the subs a lot to get stuff going.
Yep. And so did I answer your question?
Yeah.
All right.
Since I got you here.
Would you speak a little bit about the difference between a construction manager and a general contractor? And I just wanted to highlight those features because that's an option that the county is going to be considering as we move forward with identifying how we're going to construct our facility. And so there's still a lot of decisions to be made with that regard, but I think that there's features and options there that merit being highlighted a little bit, if you would.
Well, let's just talk about construction portion of it and the differences, the nuances between general contracting and construction management. If we were to send this out to the public for bid, general contractors would pick up the drawings and they would put together a number. And they may pull people from Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Des Moines, Omaha. It's a very sizable project. So one of the things that's been discussed at the county level is how do you keep those jobs and keep this project local? And one of the ways that the state of Iowa, we work with the state of Iowa, and they had great examples of, they had their 2 large prison projects that they sent out under that exact model. And Walsh Construction out of Illinois came in and they actually got the work. And they brought electricians in from Chicago. They took a lot of jobs that would have been Iowan jobs, and they were somebody else's jobs. So the state caught onto that and they went into construction management, and we were hired by the state to do that. And what we do is we break it down into smaller bid packages. So there might be an earthwork contractor here in town that would be capable of doing the project. We would have an earthwork bid package. Well, they contract directly with the county versus the county contracting directly with that general contractor. And what that does is that gives more and more local contractors the ability to bid directly to the county, do smaller portions of it, and it does keep the project built by local people. So that's construction-wise, the logistics of what that is. The other benefit that the county receives is they've got the second set of eyes taking a look at the project during design. So one of the questions that came up was, how much does this cost? So we had the opportunity to look at it from our perspectives and came up to very similar, very close number to what Shive was at. But as we start moving forward in the design process, the goal would be to have them continue to do estimates, or have us do estimates, to make sure that we're staying on track, so that when the project gets ready to go out to bid next spring, we're on track and we don't have any surprises. Because once the referendum passes, that's exactly how much money we had to spend on the facility.
Thank you.
You bet.
Is there any additional questions?
I just had-
Yeah.
I was just wondering about the 911 communication center.
Mm-hmm.
You guys have that on like the second tier. Would you want that more towards the basement or the base level, just for like tornado reasons?
One of the main things currently, hold on one second.
Maybe even repeat the question.
So the question was, is in the current design, the communications 911 center is located on the second floor. You asked if it wouldn't be wiser to have it on the first floor. There's pluses and minuses. One of the big things, I'm not sure if you've ever been in the lobby at the law center where it's currently at, but if you have ever been in there, and we have someone who, unfortunately not everybody that calls 911 is super nice to us, and they're not necessarily following along with what we're saying. So sometimes we're having to raise our voices, momentarily to get, the caller back under control. So privacy is one of the biggest issues. So as you saw with the design, the sheriff's administrative offices are located on the first floor. So people that come in to pick up civil papers, for evictions, garnishments, gun permits, things like that, they all have the potential to be hearing exactly what's going on. And when people are calling 911 or the police department, they don't necessarily want everybody to know their business. So the main reason for putting it upstairs is for privacy.
Okay, yeah, I was just wondering, like, just because of the recent tornadoes, for safety reasons, because, you guys are the first ones that somebody will call for help.
Right.
So that's why I was kind of.
And that's another thing too, and I can touch on this, and I'm sure Mike can probably fill in the huge gaps that I'm gonna leave, but this will be constructed to a hardened level. It won't be like an average house to where if there is a tornado, even a minor tornado can do significant damage to a house. This facility is going to be built with steel construction, so steel can obviously hold up to a lot more force than your standard, wood frame construction. Also, the windows will be made of ballistic material, so, you see a lot of times where windows break during a tornado, whether it be from projectiles, the winds, whatever the case may be, these windows will be made out of ballistic material that'll help to eliminate some of that. So it will be a hardened facility. Yeah, obviously, we try to prepare for everything that we possibly can. There's no way we can 100% guarantee it will withstand every single hazard that we would come across, but we're doing our best to design it so that it will withstand most of the hazards we routinely face here in Clinton County.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering about just the safety reasons.
Did I miss anything, Mike?
You're right.
All right.
Yeah, you got it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I didn't see an outside facility for the inmates.
So if you scroll back to the first floor, and, okay, I'll try. There again, I'll be able to defer to Mike if I don't get this right, but these two spaces here be our rec areas. And a couple of things that accomplishes, and a little bit about how we accomplish that. One thing that accomplishes is we will no longer have to use a set of keys to open a cell door and personally escort an individual to the recreational area. Instead, that control unit will have electronic controls that will be able to hit a button and a door will slide open. They can leave their cell, maybe here out into a common area. The cell door will close, and then a doorway could open up between the two or out into this hallway and close behind them, and then an additional doorway could be opened up into the recreational area. So that individual will be able to escort themselves and be a hands-off, safer movement of those inmates from that recreational time to their cell and back and forth. The way that we are able to do that inside the building, though, is through a set of louvered doors and such that meets the state standards, as has been consistently referenced. That those parameters and those guidelines that our construction must meet, and the space requirements for cells and the requirements for outdoor recreation are very tightly regulated. And so this is designed and planned to meet the standards of a recreational area. And they do that through louvered doors and window space that allows fresh air and daylight and meets the requirements from the state of what that recreational area is, but it's also in a contained, internal component of our facility that way. So that's what that is. Close enough?
Very good.
Okay, thank you. We've asked a lot of these questions ourselves, and so I feel like I'm getting better at answering them. But I'm not the jail expert, that's for sure. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Want to thank you all for coming. We'll hang around, be available for additional questions. Our contact information is on the table there. We do have absentee ballot requests available. The ballots are going to be able to be voted starting on Monday at the auditor's office, and so if you mail those in, they'll mail you a ballot. When you form your opinion, you can vote from your kitchen table, and then certainly at the auditor's office anytime starting Monday. And then the referendum on May 3rd is what we're working towards, and so all of those polling locations are, I believe most of them are the typical polling locations that you have for other events, but if you're not sure, please reference the county's website or the newspaper as those are published. Yes, sir.
I just read this morning, there's an election for extension service, correct?
I believe,
Also on the ballot.
yeah, also on the ballot, there will be, is it two open seats?
I think there's 2 open
on
seats.
the county's extension board. And so there's individuals who have volunteered to be on that ballot for consideration that'll be included in that vote.